We may have our eyes closed when we die, but they don't stay that way. The first time I realized this was around 3 a.m., and I had to check something in the morgue. I looked, and this dead dude's eyes were looking in my direction. It was a Thursday, the kind of unremarkable Thursday that bleeds into the next and the next, a monotonous procession of paperwork and hushed conversations. I was on the night shift, a graveyard rotation I'd grown accustomed to. The silence of the hospital, the only sound the hum of the ventilation system, and the occasional drip of N4, had become the soundtrack of my life. But that night, the silence was shattered by a tremor of unease. I'd been sent to the morgue to retrieve a patient's file, a routine task that usually took me less than a minute. The air in the morgue was always cold, a chill that seemed to seep into your bones, but that night, it was colder than usual, carrying a strange, almost palpable tension. The morgue was dimly lit, fluorescent lights casting long, eerie shadows. Rows of stainless steel drawers lined the walls, each one holding a silent, still resident. I made my way to the designated drawer, the number etched on the front a cold reminder of the life it held. I pulled the drawer open, the metallic screech echoing unnaturally in the silence. And that's when I saw it. The man's eyes, closed as they should be, were looking at me. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me, the exhaustion of the night shift blurring my perception. But when I looked again, the eyes were still there, staring at me with an unnerving intensity. It wasn't just that they were open, it was the look in them. A flicker of something, aware. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst through my chest. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was impossible. Dead people don't open their eyes. Dead people don't look at you. I fled the morgue, my legs pumping, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The silence of the hospital, once a comfort, now felt like a vast expanse of dread. I needed to tell someone, anyone, but the words wouldn't come. The next few weeks were a blur of denial and fear. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, a product of my overactive imagination. But the image of those eyes, those unsettlingly aware eyes, haunted my dreams. It bled into my waking hours, a constant, cold presence in the back of my mind. I started noticing things. Subtle shifts in the morgue, a chill that seemed to follow me around, the faintest of whispers when the hospital was supposedly empty. I felt watched, constantly under surveillance by unseen eyes. The other nurses started to notice my change, the sudden shadows under my eyes, the nervous tics I developed. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Sarah, a seasoned nurse with kind eyes and a calming presence, told me one morning. "You need to take a break." "I'm fine," I mumbled, but my voice was a shaky whisper. I couldn't tell her what was wrong. How could I? Who would believe me? One night, while cleaning the supply room, I overheard a conversation. Two orderlies, their voices hushed, were talking about the morgue. "Heard Dr. Reed found another one with the eyes open," one said, a shiver in his voice. "Yeah, it's been happening more often." "Freaky, isn't it?" "Freaky is an understatement." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just me. It wasn't some figment of my imagination. It was real. And it was spreading. Panic tightened its grip on me. I had to find out what was happening. I had to understand why the dead were waking up, why they were looking at me. It became my obsession, a dangerous, consuming fire that burned inside me. I started researching, scouring medical journals, ancient texts, any source of information that might hold an answer. I learned about near-death experiences, about the lingering consciousness some people reported after clinical death. But nothing explained this. Nothing explained why the dead were opening their eyes, looking at the living. My research led me to a forgotten corner of the hospital library, a dusty book with a leather cover and faded gold lettering. The book, titled "The Silent Watchers," spoke of an ancient entity, a being that existed on the fringes of life and death, a force that manipulated the veil between the worlds. It spoke of eyes, of souls trapped in the physical realm, unable to move on, unable to fully die. And it spoke of a connection, a specific energy that allowed some individuals to see them. The words jumped off the page, resonating with a terrifying truth. I was one of those individuals. I was a conduit, a bridge between the living and the departed. And the eyes, those unsettlingly aware eyes, were not just looking at me. They were looking through me. Fear intertwined with a sense of dread, a chilling awareness of my own fate. I was no longer simply a night shift nurse. I was a reluctant witness, a channel for the silent screams of the departed. My life became a constant battle against the encroaching darkness. The nights were the worst. The hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a prison, haunted by the silent gazes of the departed. The faces of the dead were etched in my mind, a chorus of silent accusations. One night, I was alone in the morgue, the cold air thick with anticipation. I knew what was coming. I felt it in the bone-deep chill that pierced through my clothes, in the hairs on my arms that stood on end. The drawer opened. And there they were, the rows of eyes, staring at me, a silent judgment. I felt a coldness seep into my soul, a terrifying sense of wrongness. But then, something shifted. A faint whisper, a fragile thought. Help us! It was a plea, a symphony of sorrow that echoed through the morgue. The eyes weren't just staring anymore. They held despair yearning. They were trapped, and they needed me. My fear began to recede, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. I was the only one who could see them, the only one who could hear them. I was the bridge, the reluctant shepherd for these lost souls. And in that moment I understood that my fear was not a weakness, but a necessary part of my existence. I was bound to them, and to the task that awaited. The night shift continued, but it was no longer the same. The hospital was no longer a place of dread, but a sanctuary, a battlefield where I fought to ease the suffering of the unseen. I was the keeper of their stories, the voice of the silent watchers. And even though the eyes still watched me, they no longer filled me with fear. They were a reminder, a chilling echo of the delicate line between life and death, a testament to the enduring mystery of the human spirit, and the responsibility that came with being the sole witness to their final gaze. We had to cut down a guy who hanged himself in his garage, nothing overly special. Except his neck had stretched, and I mean a good 10/12 inches. I had made a comment about him looking like a giraffe. The police officer beside me said, "More like a brontosaurus." It was a heavy-set man hanging. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of stale gasoline. The garage was dimly lit, a single bare bulb casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. The man, a Mr. Henderson, according to the crumpled business card clutched in his hand, swung from a rusty beam, a grotesque parody of a marionette. His face was purple, his tongue lolling out like a swollen, bruised plum. But it was his neck that truly stole my attention. It was elongated, stretched like a piece of taffy pulled too far. The skin, once smooth, was now a mottled expanse of red and white, stretched thin over the distorted tendons and muscles. "Christ!" I muttered, instinctively stepping back a pace. My partner, Officer Davis, a seasoned veteran who had seen more than his fair share of death, chuckled humorlessly. "Yep, that's one way to get a longer neck. More like a brontosaurus," Davis added, his eyes fixed on the unfortunate spectacle. It was a morbid jest, but it helped break the suffocating tension. Cutting him down was a grim, methodical affair. We had to be careful, not to disturb the scene more than necessary. The rope, a thick nylon cord, was tightly wound around his neck, digging deep into the stretched flesh. I could hear the faint creak of the beam as we worked, the scraping of the blade against the rope, a sound that seemed to echo in the confined space. As we lowered him, I felt a pang of macabre fascination. His body slumped, heavy and lifeless, but his neck remained impossibly extended, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. The medical examiner, Dr. Evans, was a woman with a face like a weathered mask, perpetually etched with a look of grim professionalism. She arrived shortly after we had secured the body and began her examination. "Remarkable," she murmured, her voice as clinical as a scalpel. "The elongation, it's unprecedented. We later learned that the phenomenon, while rare, was not entirely unheard of. In cases of extreme hanging, particularly with individuals of a certain build, the pressure on the cervical spine could cause significant stretching of the ligaments and soft tissues. But Mr. Henderson's case was extreme. The 10 to 12 inches of elongation was unheard of. Dr. Evans couldn't explain it. Neither could any of her colleagues. No one knew why his neck had stretched so significantly. The case was closed quickly enough. Suicide, the official ruling. The family, a quiet, unassuming lot, seemed relieved it was over. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to think about it. But I couldn't shake the image of Mr. Henderson's elongated neck. It haunted my dreams, a surreal, stretched nightmare. The image of his face, purple and contorted, with eyes wide and vacant, it lingered long after the details of the case faded. I started having trouble sleeping. The garage, that dim, stale-smelling space, kept replaying in my mind. I'd find myself staring at my own neck in the mirror, tracing the curve with my fingers, a morbid fascination with the vulnerability of this seemingly insignificant part of my anatomy. I went to see Dr. Evans a few weeks later. She was surprised to see me. I tried to sound casual, but my voice trembled. I just wanted to know more about it, I said. About what happened to Mr. Henderson. She looked at me with her usual impassive gaze. It was a rare case, she said. A freak occurrence. But why? I pressed. Why him? Why did his neck stretch so much? She sighed, the sound a weary sigh of a woman who had seen too much death. We don't know, she said. We may never know. The human body, it has its mysteries, and sometimes the answers remain elusive, forever hidden behind the veil of the unknown. Her words didn't offer any solace. They only fueled my growing unease. The more I tried to understand the case, the more unsettling it became. The more I learned, the more it felt like the case was not closed, just dormant. Over the next few months, news reports of similar cases started emerging. At first, they were dismissed as coincidences, rare anomalies. But the cases kept piling up. A farmer in Iowa, a construction worker in Chicago, a school teacher in Texas, all found hanged in their garages or sheds, all with an unnervingly long, stretched neck. The authorities dismissed the connection at first. They were labeled suicides or accidents, explained away by improbable circumstances. But the uncanny similarities persisted. The method, the location, and most alarmingly, the elongated neck. It was a growing concern for me. I started doing my own research, obsessively devouring medical journals, forensic reports, and even venturing into the strange and shadowy world of online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. I stumbled upon a pattern, a twisted, macabre connection I couldn't quite grasp. All the victims, seemingly isolated individuals, had experienced some form of trauma. Losing a job, a loved one, a sense of belonging, a sudden, violent upheaval in their lives. The pattern was unclear but disturbingly persistent. The longer the neck, the more intense the trauma. The more I delved into the world of these cases, the more I felt my life slipping away from me. My sleep grew more fitful, punctuated by vivid, grotesque dreams of stretched necks, contorted faces, and the smell of stale gasoline. My relationship with my wife suffered. She couldn't understand my obsession, my growing paranoia. I needed to talk to someone who might understand. Someone like Dr. Evans. I revisited her office, my voice trembling as I presented my findings. She listened silently, her expression unchanged. When I finished, she leaned back, her gaze as cold and clinical as ever. "This is not your case, detective," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "These cases are not connected, not in any way you can conceive. You're letting your imagination run wild." But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. There was something sinister at play, something beyond our understanding. I resolved to keep digging, even if it meant pushing myself to the brink of insanity. The next case involved a young woman, a librarian. Her neck was stretched to an inhuman length, the skin translucent, stretched thin over the bones. A twisted smile played on her lips, a grotesque parody of serenity. This case was different. There was a note, a cryptic message scrawled in her own hand. A message that sent shivers down my spine. "The world is tired of our short necks." The words echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition. The world, it seemed, had a new agenda. And it was an agenda we weren't prepared for. The world was stretching. We, the humans, with our short necks, were no longer enough. The world was tired of us. Someone hung himself with piano wire from my hometown bridge when I was a teen. The head and body were found separately, a week or two apart. The body was found first, bobbing eerily in the murky depths of the river, a macabre spectacle that forever etched itself into the collective memory of our small, riverside town. The head, well, the head remained missing, a phantom limb of the tragedy, haunting the whispers and anxieties of everyone who knew about it. I was 15, a skinny, awkward kid with a fervent passion for rowing. Our team, the River Rats, trained relentlessly on the very river where the tragedy unfolded. We were a motley crew, bound by sweat, shared blisters, and a strange camaraderie forged in the face of relentless physical exertion. The bridge, a skeletal structure of steel and concrete, loomed over our training course, a constant reminder of the dark secret it held. After the discovery of the body, a strange tension settled over our practices. Every time the oarlocks creaked, every time the boat bumped against the water, a collective gasp would rise from the rowers. It was the head, we all thought. The head bobbing in the water, seeking its final resting place. The fear was irrational, I know. But the human mind is a strange beast, especially in the throes of adolescence when anxieties can blossom into full-blown phobias overnight. Our coach, a gruff but kind man named Mr. Henderson, tried to dismiss our fears, telling us it was just the sound of the boat, the natural rhythm of the river. But his words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the constant, gnawing fear that gripped us. One particularly blustery afternoon, during one of our grueling interval training sessions, the unthinkable happened. We were a few hundred yards from the bridge, the wind whipping at our backs, the river churning beneath us. Suddenly, there was a loud thunk, a sickening, metallic sound that echoed through the air. The oars froze in mid-stroke, the rhythmic cadence of our rowing shattered. Panic erupted. We all simultaneously looked over our shoulders, towards the depths of the river. Was it the head? Had the river finally yielded its secret? Mr. Henderson, his face pale, shouted for us to row harder, to get away from the area. He was trying to sound authoritative, but his voice trembled. We obeyed almost instinctively, our terror momentarily overshadowing our exhaustion. We rowed frantically, our hearts hammering in our chests, our eyes glued to the dark water swirling behind us. Every ripple, every splash, seemed to amplify the fear. It was the head, I was convinced. It had to be. We didn't slow down until we were back at the boathouse, our breaths ragged, our bodies shaking. Mr. Henderson, his usual stoicism replaced by a look of sheer relief, dismissed it as a piece of driftwood hitting the hull. But I knew, in the deepest recesses of my mind, that it wasn't driftwood. The incident became a recurring nightmare. Every time we trained, the fear loomed over us, a constant companion. It became an unspoken pact, a shared secret that bound us together, a reminder of the thin veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the mundane and the macabre. Weeks turned into months, and the head remained elusive. The town slowly moved on, the initial shock and horror slowly fading into a subdued murmur. The bridge was still there, its shadow stretching over the river, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath it. But the whispers, the fear, they lingered. I, however, couldn't shake the incident. It was as if the thunk had lodged itself in my soul, a constant, nagging reminder of the fragility of life, the unexpectedness of tragedy. My dreams were filled with the river, with the bridge, with the terrifying image of the severed head bobbing in the murky depths. Then, one autumn afternoon, the news spread like wildfire. The head had been found, snagged on a submerged tree branch, not far from where we had heard the thunk. It was a grotesque discovery, a final chapter in a chilling tale that had haunted our town for far too long. I remember standing by the river, watching as a small group of police officers cautiously loaded the remains into a van. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a profound sense of unease. The fear I had carried for so long was finally gone, but the memory of it remained, a scar on my psyche. The tragedy on the bridge became a part of my hometown's history, a forgotten footnote in the annals of our collective past. But for me, it was a lived experience, a potent reminder of the hidden currents that run beneath the surface of our lives, the tragedies that can lurk in the most ordinary of places. The river, once a source of joy and camaraderie, was forever tainted, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of fear. The thunk, the sound of the head hitting our boat, became a metaphorical echo of the silent screams, the unspoken grief, the haunting legacy of a tragedy that forever changed the way I looked at the world. The bridge still stands, a skeletal silhouette against the sky. But every time I see it, I hear the thunk, a phantom sound that echoes in the chambers of my memory, a haunting reminder of the incident that changed us all. It is a reminder that some things, some tragedies, never truly fade, but become woven into the fabric of who we are, shaping our perspective, influencing our actions, and defining us in ways we never anticipated. The river continues to flow, its secrets hidden beneath its surface, a silent testament to the enduring power of fear, the fragility of life, and the indelible mark that tragedy can leave on the human heart. It's a reminder that even in the most ordinary of settings, darkness can lurk. And sometimes, all it takes is a single thunk, a chilling echo, to remind us of the shadows that reside beneath the surface of our seemingly safe and familiar world. The river rats continued to train, our scars both physical and psychological, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But we were never quite the same. We had all seen something, heard something, that would forever linger at the edges of our consciousness, a grim companion in the ever-present dance of life and death. The river, once a source of pure joy, now carried a new weight, a subtle undercurrent of the tragic and the unknown. It was a constant reminder that even the most beautiful of landscapes can harbor the darkest of secrets. And for me, for all of us who rode on that river, the thunk would echo forever, a spectral reminder of the boy who hung himself from the bridge, and the head that bobbed, seeking its final resting place in the depths of a river that would never truly forget. My mom was a paramedic for 15 years and once had to do a body recovery for 2 teenage girls on a full moon walking through waist-high grass and fog while their wrecked van played Uninvited by Alanis Morissette. She says it was one of the most unsettling moments of her career. It was a night like any other, or so it had seemed at first. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an ethereal, unsettling glow on the world below. A thick fog, like a shroud, draped itself across the fields, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. The air was still and heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and disturbing. My mom, Sarah, was on duty that night, her usual calm demeanor tinged with a slight unease that she couldn't quite place. The dispatch call came in just after midnight, a garbled message about a single-vehicle accident, a van that had apparently veered off the road somewhere near the old abandoned quarry. The location was a notorious spot amongst local teenagers, a secluded area perfect for a clandestine party, or a quiet rendezvous in the darkness. There was a history of reckless driving there, fueled by youthful exuberance and a careless disregard for safety. As Sarah and her partner, a seasoned veteran named Frank, navigated the winding country roads, the fog grew thicker, obscuring the already dimly lit landscape. The siren wailed, a mournful cry in the oppressive stillness of the night. The rhythmic pulse of the siren was a stark contrast to the unsettling quiet that settled over them as they approached the quarry. The rhythmic pulse of the siren was a stark contrast to the unsettling quiet that settled over them as they approached the quarry. The crash site was a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. The van, a beat-up old model with faded paint, was lodged against a cluster of gnarled trees, its headlights still faintly glowing, casting an eerie light on the surrounding scene. Even before they spotted the bodies, they could hear the faint, distorted strains of Alanis Morissette's Ironic leaking from the van's speakers, a bizarre and unwelcome soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. The music was a jarring discord in the stillness of the night, a mocking reminder of the fragility of life, playing on loop in the aftermath of a brutal end. "It's like something out of a horror movie," Frank muttered, his voice laced with a mixture of shock and disgust. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The eerie combination of the full moon, the fog, and the jarring music created a palpable atmosphere of dread. The fog seemed to press in on them, making it hard to breathe, a suffocating reminder of the finality of the situation. The two girls, barely teenagers, were lying amidst the wreckage, their bodies pale and lifeless against the dark earth. They had been thrown from the van during the impact, their youthful dreams abruptly snuffed out. The scene was gruesome, the stark reality of death a chilling contrast to the vibrant life that was once contained within those now still forms. The fog seemed almost to whisper, pressing in on them, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life. They did what they could, their practiced hands moving with a grim efficiency as they examined the girls, confirming the obvious. The air grew colder, the fog denser, and the music continued to play, a macabre lullaby. Sarah found the girls' belongings scattered around the wreckage, a crumpled, half-finished letter, a faded photograph of a birthday party, a pair of bright pink sneakers lying forlornly on the muddy ground. They were just kids, lives cut short before they barely had a chance to begin. "We need to get them out," Frank said, his voice steady despite the chill that crept into his bones. The ground was uneven, soft with the decay of autumn leaves under the deceptive layer of fog. Each step was precarious, the fog so thick it felt like walking through a dream. The moon barely penetrated the wall of fog, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like mischievous spirits. As they carefully navigated through the tall grass, the mournful strains of Ironic followed them like a phantom, a ghostly echo in the silence that had fallen over the scene. It was a song about life's absurdities, and in that moment, it felt cruelly appropriate. The fact that the music, almost mocking in its carefree, upbeat nature, played on without interruption, added to the unsettling nature of the situation. The girls' bodies were gently moved to the waiting ambulance. Sarah and Frank stepped back, exhausted and silent, the weight of the tragedy settling upon them. She could feel the faint pulse of Frank's heart, a rhythmic echo of both her own distress and his silent grief. Later, at the station, Sarah cleaned up, the images of the crash site, of the girls' faces etched into her memory. The faint scent of gasoline and mud still clung to her clothes, a somber reminder of the night's grim events. "It's the fog and the music," she later shared with her family, trying to articulate the unsettling nature of that night. "It just felt wrong. Like something wasn't right, that the natural order of things had been disturbed." It was a night that became etched in her mind, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the randomness of death. The image of the two teenage girls, their lives ended so abruptly under a full moon, and the eerie, uninvited presence of Alanis Morissette's music, forever lingered. There was a period where Sarah listened to nothing but classical music, trying to cleanse the noise of that night from her memory. It never quite went away. Each full moon, she would find herself looking out the window, a shadow of apprehension settling over her. It wasn't the gruesome nature of the accident alone that made the night so unsettling, though the sight of the girls' young bodies was undoubtedly traumatic. It was the atmosphere, the eeriness of the fog, the haunting strains of Ironic bleeding out of the damaged vehicle, the moon's stark, unforgiving light. It was the palpable sense that something was off, that the natural order of life and death had been disrupted in a way that made her skin crawl. After 15 years as a paramedic, Sarah retired for good, unable to shake the feeling that the night in the fog was a sort of warning, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of the living from the world beyond. The haunting image of the girls, the uninvited song, and the full moon became a persistent reminder she couldn't ignore. It was a night that forever changed her, leaving her with a profound respect for the fragility of life and a subtle fear of the unknown. The world, once perceived as safe and predictable, now held a lurking hint of the sinister, a lingering reminder that darkness can be beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The full moon still casts its light on the world, but Sarah rarely looks at it without a shiver. The music of Alanis Morissette is forever associated with that night, a chilling soundtrack to a horrific chapter of her life, an echo of a world where the lines between the living and the dead are sometimes worryingly thin. The experience gave Sarah a different perspective on life. It gave her a sense of gratitude for every sunrise, every moment shared with loved ones, and a healthy respect for the hidden dangers that can lurk just beneath the surface of life. She learned that even in the midst of chaos and darkness, there is always beauty to be found, if you dare to look for it with open eyes and a grateful heart. The memory of that night, of the two girls, their lives violently cut short, remains a powerful force in her life. It serves as a constant reminder that the unexpected can strike at any moment, and that life is a precious gift to be cherished. Yet, amidst the sorrow and the haunting memories, Sarah found a profound sense of purpose. The work she had done, the lives she had touched, the moments she had helped to preserve, held deep meaning. And it was a reminder that, in the face of tragedy, the human spirit can find a way to endure. I was the night watchman at a mental hospital. One of my jobs was to check the temperature in the small morgue that was located behind the chapel. Now you would think that wandering around the bowels of a functioning mental institution would freak most people out, but I was okay with that. Walking around the sprawling, labyrinthine corridors, past the barred windows and the hushed whispers of unseen patients, never really bothered me. I had a certain stoicism, a quiet acceptance of the strange and unsettling that came with the territory. But walking into the morgue scared the shit out of me. It wasn't the smell, though that was certainly a factor. A cold, antiseptic tang, mixed with a faint, metallic undercurrent that clung to the back of your throat. It wasn't the dim, flickering lights that cast long, distorted shadows across the tiled floor, making the space feel both claustrophobic and impossibly vast. No, it was the sheer, unsettling possibility that lay within those 3 metal drawers. My job, every few hours, was to open each drawer, insert a thermometer, and ensure the temperature remained within the acceptable range. Simple enough on paper. In practice, it was a ritual that sent shivers down my spine every single time. I was convinced that somebody, or somebody, was going to be in one of those drawers. The sense of foreboding I had when I opened those drawers literally made me sweat. My heart would pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Every little creak of the aged metal, every bump from the ancient refrigeration unit, every tick of the condensers, made me jump. My skin would prickle, and I'd find myself holding my breath, half expecting to see a pair of vacant eyes staring back at me from the inky depths. It was a ridiculous fear, I knew. Logically, I understood that the bodies were properly handled, prepped, and stored by the hospital staff. It wasn't a horror movie set, where corpses sprang to life or whispered secrets from the beyond. But logic had little to do with the primal fear that gripped me in that cold, sterile room. To try and calm myself down, I started listening to my Walkman. Yes, children, it was that long ago. A mix of classic rock and new wave filled the silence, a small beacon of normalcy in the heart of the chilling building. It helped for a while. But then the paranoia would set in. What if something did sneak up on me while I was plugged in, lost in the music? What if there was a noise, a sound I couldn't hear over the headphones? A low growl, a dragging foot, the rasp of a breath? My freakout level, on a scale of 1 to 10, was now about a 9.5 every time I entered the morgue. Nothing ever happened. Not once, in the entire year I worked there, did I ever encounter anything remotely supernatural, or even remotely unsettling, outside of the drawers themselves. No ghostly apparitions, no blood-curdling screams, no unexplained chills. Just the endless, oppressive silence of the night, punctuated by the rhythmic hum of the refrigeration unit and my own ragged breaths. But the fear lingered. The memory of that cold, metallic dread was seared into my mind. Even now, decades later, the mere thought of the morgue sends a shiver down my spine. The rest of my job was, in comparison, a breeze. My rounds took me through endless corridors, past the locked wards, the sterile operating theaters, and the administrative offices, which usually sat eerily quiet and empty. I'd patrol the grounds, making sure the perimeter was secure, the lights were functioning, and that no one had decided to take a midnight stroll beyond the fences. There were nights so still you could hear the crickets chirping, and others where the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and rattling my nerves. I learned to anticipate the sounds of the building, the creaking floorboards, the distant clanging of pipes, the occasional muffled shout from a patient experiencing a particularly restless night. I learned to recognize the patterns of the hospital's rhythms, the ebb and flow of sleep and restlessness. I also learned to appreciate the quiet moments. The solitude of the long, empty corridors, the star-filled sky visible from the grounds, the occasional glimpse of a full moon casting an ethereal glow on the manicured lawns. It was a strange existence, a world apart from the normal flow of life. I met a few of the staff, the doctors and nurses who worked tirelessly, often under immense pressure, caring for the patients. They were a dedicated group, often overworked and underappreciated. They treated me with a mixture of respect and mild amusement, recognizing my youth and the strange path I'd chosen. Some of the patients, the ones who were less severely affected, I would occasionally exchange a few words with through the barred windows. Their stories, often fragmented and unsettling, were glimpses into a world I could never truly understand. The pain, the confusion, the yearning for connection and normalcy, it was a heavy burden to bear. I wasn't immune to the sadness and the darkness that permeated the air of the hospital. It clung to the walls, seeped out of the shadowed corners, and sometimes echoed in my own thoughts. But I also saw the resilience of the human spirit, the flicker of hope in the most troubled eyes. And then there were the nights, the rare nights, when the quiet was absolute. No sounds, no movement, just the stillness of the night pressing in from all sides. Those were the most unsettling of all. It was as if the building itself held its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. But eventually, the dawn would break. The first rays of sunlight would pierce through the grimy windows, illuminating the world in a new light. The sounds of the hospital would awaken, the staff would arrive, and the cycle would begin again. I worked there for about a year, just long enough to save enough money to start university. I wasn't sure what I wanted to study, but I knew I wanted something different. Something less chilling. When I left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was finally free of the nightly ritual of the morgue, the constant fear that gnawed at my insides. Sadness for the strange world I'd inhabited, for the patients whose stories I'd glimpsed, for the staff who dedicated their lives to the difficult task of trying to mend broken minds. Now, when people talk about their worst jobs, and I chime in with, "I was the night watchman at a mental hospital," it's usually a showstopper. Their eyes widen, their eyebrows shoot up. They ask me questions. "Did you see anything? Did you ever get scared? Was it really that bad?" I tell them, in a matter-of-fact tone, that yes, it was that bad. I tell them about the morgue, about the endless corridors, about the fragile hope and the crushing despair. And I tell them about the fear. The fear that still lingers, a cold whisper in the back of my mind, a reminder of the night I spent guarding the secrets of a place where sanity and madness danced on a razor's edge.